Dennis.
I guess since we're getting close to the end, I just want to transition to maybe a more general question of looking at, sort of land system. And to me, it's how do we incorporate some of the ecosystem?
Yeah, if we're going to ask the general question, yeah, how about you come up too, Kate? And we'll go up here.
If we could sort of think about what are some of the ecosystem level questions and looking at these land system changes and these planetary land issues, because underlying these efforts to look at land cover and land use are things related to, what's the land productivity, what's the delivery of nitrogen use efficiencies of these systems that we're looking at. And so I think there are these underlying principles at the ecosystem level that needs to be incorporated into asking planetary land questions. And so I would like to hear from you how we might do that. How do we incorporate the ecosystem aspects into some of these studies?
Well, I think you mean into the global studies or into, yeah. I mean, there is, on the whole, the ecosystem services research is, of course, to a large extent, very localized, and there is a lot of it. The one I mentioned on looking at carbon stocks in these fallows is just one example. I think there are lots of them. The problem, of course, is to scale that up because it's very, I mean, like many other things, it's very localized, very contextualized. But I think a bit like I said, when I was talking about case studies, I'm not just talking about socioeconomic studies, but also, and cultural studies, also ecosystem service assessments that really take a maybe random approach to looking at many different biomes and looking at the breadth of ecosystem services and try to get more generalization from that. Because I think there's a lot, it suffers a little bit from the same, that we have a lot of studies on ecosystem services that also are doing their own methodology, and some of them become difficult to compare. So it's pretty much the same as the other case studies. Yeah.
Would you like to say something, Kate?
Sure. On the global level, I think there is increasingly in the last few years an interest in looking at ecosystem services in global land use and land cover change, but it's been more, it's not a completely broad picture. It's sort of started with what can we actually say with the models we have, and a lot of it is more quantifying the effects of other things you might do on what it means for ecosystem services. I've seen one or two papers where they're trying to sort of, well, what if we try to protect this service? Can we still get to some other goal, or what does that mean? But I think this is where I really appreciated Ole's talk, and I think some linking between the local scale modeling and the global scale modeling would be really nice, because a lot of those things we don't know how to quantify in our models, but we can learn from local scale efforts and case studies and try to incorporate those going forward.
All right, thank you. So that's more of a technical question. Before we take the general questions from the audience, I just want to ask one general question that actually is the question in a sense of this whole session, and I'll ask each of you. So what is your vision for the planetary land system?
Hope or vision? For me, it's, I mean, I'll go back to my roots from working with smallholders in very local settings. And to me, the ideal would be that, especially in the global south, that this takes on a new trajectory where people are able to make choices themselves based on a set of options that are interesting to them. At the moment, what's happening, unfortunately, in a lot of places is that there is a lot of change generated by people themselves, but there's also a lot of change that's being enforced. Some of it is from the conservation side, which has very good intentions in terms of making the world, I mean, generating more nature. Others are more on the economic side, developing, the whole commodity side of it. And I think it's often taking choices away from people. And so my future, it's maybe more, not so much the land system, but at least the social side of the land system, is that that people can make their own choices. That they and I have a hope or a vision that this will also, in the end, generate a better management of environment. That it will actually protect forest. It might maybe there we will have to lose some on the way there, but it will protect nature and forest.
Great. How about you, Kate?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of the work I do is more descriptive than normative, but when I look at the world, I sort of see a series of trade-offs. If we do this one thing, it makes this other thing harder, and if we do this, then it makes that harder. And I think my vision for the future is that we're aware of those trade-offs as we're making choices, rather than having things be externalities and consequences of our actions. So as the people in your world are making choices, that we really understand what might happen as a product of those.
So kind of a better understood trade-off world.
Yeah, rather than just sort of making a decision and being like, oh, well, that happened. Let's try to think about what might happen before we make a choice.
At the global scale, the planetary
Yeah.
scale. Excellent. Are there any big questions out there for the group? How about Ricardo? Yeah, we didn't get to you before.
Thanks a lot. It's mostly to all, but I think both can answer. There is this issue of big questions, consolidating science in mostly large groups or networks that you basically were advocating in one side, but also this difference between large communities and small communities is spatially heterogeneous. And if you look at the small groups in the periphery of the world, and this can be disruptive in the good sense, as you mentioned, but sort of contradicts your proposal that, advocating for more globally relevant science and consolidating science and having stereotyped case studies contradicts the idea of promoting disruptive, local, and locally relevant questions that you were also advocating in some sense. So how do you think this can be, merged?
I don't have a clear answer to that, because I literally saw this paper a few days ago, and it just made me think about it. But of course, we should not get rid of the disruptive science. I think that's really, really important. But I was just wondering whether this is mainly what we do. It's not mainly only that. I know that. We like, for example, the work on mid-range theory in land system science. It's maybe not a huge team, but it is. I think that's really important that we, in that way, develop our science. So there is already something. But I was just wondering if we could have both, think big, but at the same time also have the disruptive science going on, because we need that to also not get stuck in some narrative that turns out to be wrong.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I think meetings like this are a way of going forward with that. So I would view myself as someone that works on a large team. So I have probably 20 people that I work with day to day. And I think the small disruptive science that I get from giving a presentation in a venue like this changes what we do in our development pattern. And I think the more we engage across large teams coming to meetings with small teams and vice versa, we can sort of get disruptive science into large development and global visioning.
All right. We have approximately 2 minutes left. I have another big question, and maybe it's the question for our community. So how can land system science help us realize this better future for life on land? What's our role as scientists?
You first.
Wow.
Well,
I think some of it, again, since I came back to my vision for the future is a better understanding and more cognizant choices. So I think land system science has a pretty big role in that, and trying to help understand all of that trade-off space, as well as sort of thinking about, when you look at those, is there a way we can innovate around that space? And then how do we do things on the ground? And so I think there's quite a bit of where our research can really help shape the future. And as long as we can get that research to people that make decisions, then I think it's helpful.
And I'll challenge you a little bit on that. So the criticism that's often applied to our scholarly community is just throwing the science over the fence. Do you see some way to integrate those kind of tools that you develop into better processes of negotiating the future?
Yeah, and I think this is where some of these global assessments that Ole mentioned can really be helpful, because governments read those, they look at those, people look at those, and so the extent to which we can get our science into forums that and look across that policy science divide, I think that's where we can do that.
How about you, Ole?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would also say that, I mean, looking from the perspective of the land is, I mean, I think Oliver Morten said it also in the plenary yesterday, that it's a really good lens, because not everything, but much of what we do is somehow connected to production of land, or use of land. And then the other thing I think we can really contribute is that we are inherently an interdisciplinary science. And when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they are all about interdisciplinarity, all of them basically. So I think that's really where we can contribute, and I think it's a really opportunity for this community to be even more forward in the years to come, because these agendas, I mean, also politically it's clearly that we can't just solve it by looking at very, very specific elements of the systems we...
All right, so the world needs what land science has to
Yes.
offer. All right, thank you, everyone. That concludes this session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ole. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.